Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into healing and wellness, but we're going way beyond just like the basics.
Yeah.
We've got two really fascinating sources that we're going to be looking at. One is all about holistic health practices,
Okay.
and the other one is from a faith-based wellness center called Faithfully Guided Health. And what we really want to do is unpack what true wellness even means, and more importantly, how you can actually use this information to, make a real difference in your life.
Well, it's amazing to see these different perspectives on health and how they can actually work together.
Mm-hmm.
Both of these sources agree on one really important thing, which is that healing isn't just about, not having a disease or something like that. It's a constant, holistic journey.
So it's like a lot more than just taking a pill or two when you don't feel good.
Exactly. It's about the connection of the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And how they all affect each other.
I always thought of stress as just being like an emotional thing. But the idea that it can actually affect my immune system is kind of scary. Is there like a way to measure that?
There's a lot of research on this, actually. Studies show that chronic stress can lead to high levels of cortisol, which is a hormone that over time can weaken your immune response, making you more likely to get sick.
Oh.
Some studies even suggest that stress can slow down how fast wounds heal.
Really?
So it's not just about feeling better mentally.
Wow.
It can actually have a measurable impact on your physical health.
Okay, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So how do we even approach this whole holistic wellness thing? It seems like a lot to handle.
Well, that's where the three pillars of wellness come in: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Okay.
You need all three for stability.
Okay, let's start with the physical, because I think most people listening probably already know like the basics of that, right? Like good food, exercise, and enough sleep.
Exactly. The first source really emphasizes that when we take care of our basic needs, our bodies are amazingly resilient. We're designed to heal and bounce back, but we have to give our bodies what they need to do that.
So it's like setting the foundation for everything else.
Exactly. And then we can move to the mental and emotional pillar, where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The first source suggests things like actively cultivating a positive mindset,
Oh, wow.
even visualizing the outcomes you want. Studies show that this can actually influence our immune response. And it also emphasizes having a good support network, friends and family, because research links strong relationships with faster recovery times.
Wow, so my friends aren't just good for a night out, they're actually good for my health.
Exactly.
I like that. But where does spirituality fit into all of this?
This mind-body connection ties in perfectly with what the Faithfully Guided Health Center talks about.
Okay.
They take it a step further and incorporate a spiritual dimension, suggesting that faith can actually play a vital role in healing and overall well-being.
And I'm curious about that because I know a lot of people find comfort and strength in their faith, but how does that actually translate into like tangible health benefits?
Well, they go into this emerging field of neurotheology.
What?
Neurotheology. And they cite studies that show that practices like meditation or even communal singing can trigger certain responses in our brains and hormones.
Wow.
And these responses can lead to things like lower blood pressure and reduced inflammation.
So there's a real physiological thing happening.
Exactly. It's not just about feeling good emotionally.
Okay.
And they also point out that faith and healing have been connected for centuries. Many early Western hospitals were run by religious organizations.
It's interesting how we tend to separate science and spirituality these days, but it's really cool to see how they can actually complement each other.
I agree, and both sources highlight another powerful force in healing, which is hope.
So we're not just talking about, wishing for things to get better, right? What does that actually look like?
The first source says that hope is an active driving force that can really have an effect on our bodies.
Oh.
It's about believing that healing is possible and working towards it even when things are tough.
So just having a positive outlook can actually help me recover, because there's research on that.
Absolutely. Studies show a link between a hopeful outlook and better treatment outcomes for different conditions. It's thought that hope can reduce those stress hormones, boost the immune system, and even increase your tolerance for pain.
So it's not just like a nice feeling, it's like a real tool for healing.
Exactly. And the Faithfully Guided Health Center takes this idea a step further and suggests that faith can be a huge source of hope, especially when you're dealing with difficult health challenges.
I can see how that would provide strength and resilience, especially when facing the unknown. But what about practical steps? Like, regardless of our beliefs, are there things that we can do to incorporate this holistic approach into our lives?
Well, both sources offer a ton of practical advice that we're going to get into after a quick break. But before we do that, I'm curious what stood out to you so far as we've been talking about these different perspectives.
You mentioned practical tips before we had that moment to think. And to be honest, that's what I'm most interested in. Like, it's great to understand all these concepts.
Yeah.
But how do we actually use this stuff in our daily lives? Like, what can we start doing, like, today to feel better?
Well, the great thing is that both sources give some really practical advice that you can start using right away.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that a lot of these tips overlap, even though the sources are coming from totally different places.
Okay, so give me the highlights. Like, what are some of the top recommendations?
One that both of them emphasize is mindful eating. And it's not just about what you eat, but how you eat.
Okay.
Slowing down, savoring your food, paying attention to your body's signals of hunger and fullness.
Right.
All these things can have a big impact on digestion, nutrient absorption, even your relationship with food.
I've heard of mindful eating before, but I'll be honest, like, I haven't really tried it.
Yeah.
It always seemed a little woo-woo to me.
Right.
But if both sources are recommending it, maybe there's something to it.
It's definitely worth trying. The first source talks about it as a way to reconnect with your body's natural wisdom.
Okay.
It's about listening to those cues instead of just eating out of habit or because you're feeling emotional.
That makes sense, and I guess it could even be helpful for managing stress.
Yeah.
Speaking of stress, were there any tips on how to reduce stress? I feel like everyone could use some help with that.
Yeah, for sure. Both sources really emphasize finding healthy ways to cope with stress.
Okay.
The first source suggests things like deep breathing exercises, meditation, or just spending time in nature.
Right.
And these things can help regulate your nervous system and bring a sense of calm.
Those are all good ideas, especially spending time in nature. Like, I always feel more relaxed after going for a walk in the park or hiking in the woods. But I'm also curious about the Faithfully Guided Health Center. Like, what's their perspective on managing stress?
Well, they really highlight the power of prayer and faith as ways to deal with stress. They suggest that connecting with a higher power can bring comfort, peace, and a new perspective, especially when things are tough.
So it's about finding that support and strength from something outside of yourself.
Exactly. And they also talk about the importance of community. Being part of a faith community can give you a sense of belonging, shared values, and even practical support, which can be really helpful when you're dealing with stressful situations.
I can definitely see how all that connection and support could make a difference. It's interesting how they bring in that social aspect. It's not just about individual practices, it's about the people around you and how they help your well-being.
Absolutely. And speaking of practices, don't forget about moving your body. Both sources emphasize getting some physical activity every day, even if it's just a short walk.
Yeah.
It's not about pushing yourself to the limit. It's about finding ways to move that feel good and that you can actually stick with.
Okay, I can get behind that. I'm not a huge gym person, but I do like going for walks and riding my bike. It's a nice way to clear my head and get some fresh air.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of making small changes. Both sources agree that being consistent is what matters most. It's better to start small with achievable goals and build up from there.
That's really encouraging for people who might feel overwhelmed by the idea of making big changes. You don't have to do everything at once. Just pick one or two things that speak to you and start there.
Right. It's about progress, not perfection. And the journey is different for everybody. What works for one person might not work for another. So it's all about finding what feels right for you and your body.
As we're talking about all these tips, I keep thinking back to the 3 pillars of wellness that we were discussing earlier. It seems like these suggestions actually touch on all 3 areas.
Absolutely. Mindful eating and movement. Those nourish and strengthen your body. Stress management techniques help with your mental and emotional well-being. And things like prayer or connecting with nature can really nurture your spiritual side.
So it's like a holistic approach in action. It's not just about focusing on one area at a time. It's about weaving these practices together to support your well-being as a whole.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of functional medicine, which the Faithfully Guided Health Center practices comes in. They're all about getting to the root cause of health issues instead of just treating the symptoms.
Okay, that sounds really interesting, but can you explain what that actually means? Like, I'm not familiar with functional medicine.
Sure. They take a very personalized approach looking at your unique biochemistry, genetics, lifestyle, and environmental factors. So they're looking at the big picture, not just the specific problem you came in with.
So it's like a more individualized approach to healthcare.
Exactly. And they use a wide range of tools and therapies, including nutrition, lifestyle changes, stress management techniques, and even things like detox programs.
So they're really focused on helping people achieve optimal health and well-being in every area of their lives.
Absolutely. Their tagline is, restore your spirit, mind, and body.
Oh, wow.
which really emphasizes that connection between everything.
It's impressive how they blend conventional and alternative approaches to create this really holistic model of care. But what I find really interesting is how they integrate faith into their practice.
Yeah, that's definitely a unique part of their approach, and it might really appeal to people who are looking for a healthcare experience that aligns with their spiritual beliefs.
Speaking of faith, I'm curious to learn more about those specific claims that the Faithfully Guided Health Center makes about the health benefits of being religious. They mention things like lower blood pressure and better cognitive function. Is there any science behind all that?
That's where things get really fascinating. We'll explore the science behind those claims and discuss how faith might affect how long we live after we take a quick moment to gather our thoughts.
So before that quick moment to reflect, we are talking about some of those claims made by the Faithfully Guided Health Center about how being religious can be good for your health. Things like reduced hypertension and even better cognitive function.
Right.
It all sounds really promising, but is there actual scientific proof to back up those claims?
There's definitely a growing area of research looking into the connection between health and spirituality. And it seems like there might be something to those claims.
Well,
For
yeah.
instance, some studies show that people who regularly go to religious services tend to have lower blood pressure compared to those who don't.
That's really interesting. Do they know why that is? Is it just from being less stressed because they're more spiritual, or is there something else going on?
It's probably a mix of things. Social support is a big one. Religious communities often provide a strong sense of belonging and support, which can really help reduce stress. And like we talked about before, stress is a big factor when it comes to high blood pressure.
So it's like they have this built-in support system that helps them through life's challenges.
Exactly. And there's also the behavior aspect. Many religions encourage healthy habits like avoiding smoking and alcohol, which can also have a positive effect on your heart health.
That makes sense. What about the cognitive benefits? They mentioned something about improved cognitive function.
Yeah.
What's the evidence for that?
Well, some studies have actually linked religious practices like meditation and prayer to better cognitive function, especially for older adults. These practices might help maintain brain volume and cognitive reserve, which could potentially delay those age-related cognitive decline issues.
So it's like exercise for your brain.
Right.
I love that. But what about living longer? Is there any proof that religious people actually have longer lifespans?
That's a bit trickier. While some studies have found a connection between religious involvement and longevity, it's hard to say for sure if it's the only factor.
Okay.
As we've been talking about, religious people often have healthier habits, strong social networks, and a more positive outlook on life. All of these things can contribute to a longer life.
Right, so it's like this ripple effect where the benefits of being religious go beyond just the spiritual side, actually impact different parts of a person's life and health.
Exactly. It's all about understanding that connection between our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
Right.
And while we need more research to fully get the complex relationship between faith and health, the evidence we have now is definitely fascinating.
It really makes you stop and think about how we define health and wellness. It's clearly so much more than just not being sick. It's about living a full and vibrant life, one with purpose and connection.
I totally agree, and that's what I find so empowering about these sources.
Yeah.
They come at it from different angles, but they both ultimately agree that we have a lot more control over our health and well-being than we might think.
And they give us so many practical tools and strategies that we can use no matter what we believe or where we come from.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been a really interesting exploration into the many sides of healing and wellness. We've covered a lot, from the basic ideas of holistic health to those fascinating connections between faith and healing. We've talked about practical tips and thought-provoking questions to help you on your own journey to wellness.
And as we wrap up, I want to encourage you to think about what really resonated with you from this conversation. What's one small change you can make this week to move towards a more holistic sense of well-being?
Remember, true well-being is an ongoing journey. It's not a finish line. Be patient with yourself, celebrate those small victories, and keep learning and growing. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious and take care of yourselves.